Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025, and today's topic will be illustrating a night or a night illustration. Yeah, this will be a continuation from yesterday's video, which I will link to in the description. But before we get started, welcome back if you are returning, and welcome if you are new. I sketch and post every day, and I use timers to focus and build a sketching habit. So I'm going to start a 10-minute timer. Yeah, if you check out the previous video, you'll see that this looks quite different, although there are similarities. It's still based off of that one. But I wanted to go over, sort of demonstrate the materials that I use, go over that, and then also kind of the process, basically. So yeah, let's get started. So after yesterday's video, I was working on it. Usually that's what I do. Later I would go back and started detailing it, but I mean basically subconsciously I wanted it to look like this, but then there really wasn't any way to make it look like that using the previous method, because like after a certain point you can't really adjust the drawing. And so what I did was so I've got these acrylic markers. So yeah, they come in different colors. They're the Sharpie markers, and so I just used this color. And part of that is I was going off of the marker color, like here. I was just sticking with the color scheme because I didn't want to have to think about the color scheme. So that's part of what I want to talk about, is how even if the illustration, which is what I'm calling this, turns out pretty different, it's still the previous, like the preliminary artwork is still helpful. So for example, I just went with like this color because it's just one less thing like I had to think about. So it was still a good process, is what I'm getting at. So yeah, I just went with something similar, but since these are like paint markers, I'll paint a little bit here, but obviously I don't want to create more work for myself. But yeah, you can layer them. But yeah, they're just your typical acrylic marker. They're pretty convenient. And honestly, if I were working at this size or like in a sketchbook, I would these are pretty great. But like if I were working on a bigger piece, like if I were making this like bigger, yeah, I mean, using acrylic paint would be good because you can use different brush sizes. I mean, this is pretty much like, this is like detail, but you can get some broad strokes if the picture is small. So what I did was I just went over the previous sketch, and some things I found interesting was that the silhouette, so I wanted to change like the inside, the detail, and like the character, which I couldn't because after a while, like I said, after the markers and stuff, you can't really do anything with it. It just wasn't like, I wasn't happy with it. So I just filled it in with just this color, and the silhouette was surprisingly okay, is what I found, is that it wasn't too bad. Now I did basically have to redraw it. And so I just went in with, again, just using basically the same technique as the marker. So I just used like a color pen to do this kind of thing, the dark areas, and then just kind of just used other like kind of darker color pen, but then like with the sword. And I'll kind of talk about what I learned, because I'm also doing research I'm going to put this under world building. Yeah, I'm doing research for my story. But yeah, I just use like the black pen for this. It's like a two-handed great sword, and it looks like more like leather and stuff like that. So since it's color, that is part of it, is just the look of the materials. And also the other thing is I'll kind of go over sort of how to work with these colors, because obviously like I want to add some highlights and everything. As far as how long probably took me almost 3 hours to kind of, well, one, the first part of that was just working with the previous sketch, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, it just depends. And part of that is also just the world building aspect and the character design aspect. So it's not so much about just rendering, but it's also about the style of the artwork. Also, the other thing is that looking up reference, for example, just making it look more, and that's kind of what happened. I was looking up reference and I wanted it to be more accurate, like the armor and the sword and everything, and just the character, like the face. But yeah, after a while, you can't really change it. But one good thing about using the paint, obviously, is you can paint over it. But even then, you want to be pretty accurate. So that's why the initial sketch like helped, because I still don't really want to keep reworking this over and over. And I didn't really have to, because I basically had the color, I had the pose, and then yeah, it was just a matter of redrawing it, which of course you still need to know how to draw and like how to paint. And so today will be a little bit more about like the painting aspect of it. So I'm going to zoom in just so I can kind of demonstrate some ideas. So one thing is to add highlights. So yeah, I just covered everything with like the dark green. So there's the white marker, and I'm not going to do too much because I'm like okay with it. So one is you can add highlights. So that's one thing. And so you can go back in and add some highlights, and I'm going to let that dry. And then the other thing is you can gradually build the like the dark area. So for example, because we're using color, I might not, so this is like a dark purple, I might not use black on some other areas. I would use it sparingly to sort of accentuate things. So yeah, this is going towards painting basically, but like not, but it teaches you a lot about painting. The other thing is it's good to let it dry, because since it is paint, so after working on an area, let it dry, and then even like overnight or several hours. So part of this I wanted to talk about just the process. That's why I'm calling it illustration, because it's different. You have to be more patient. This is when it is good to go ahead, and if you have reference to, depending on how realistic, but even if this were like more cartoony, because it's not photorealistic, but yeah, even if it's more cartoony, reference still helps for believability. So once it kind of dries, there's just different approaches. One could be kind of what I did yesterday with like the highlights. I went in with kind of a light color. And this is basically what today's video will be. So this is one way to like darken the highlights, like tone it down a little bit, because these markers, they don't have a ton of like variety of color, but you can do this kind of thing with it. And also you kind of have to experiment with what kind of colors you can get. But this is basically what I was doing yesterday. And I mean, if I, like, let's say I have this and I wanted to do another sketch, I mean, it obviously would be easier because I have the design. So that's part of what happens, is that the design is important. It's a little bit more difficult if you're still figuring out like the look of the character. But part of why I wanted to do yesterday's video and also show what I'm doing right now is just to show the process of sometimes, like, just how it works, because as long as you're methodical about it, it's like it'll be alright. Because what happens, and this is part of just experience, gaining experience, what happens is that sometimes you're working on something and, like I was saying, I wanted it to be more accurate, but then because of the medium, there was no way to fix it because of it was markers, like not paint marker. So part of this is also figuring out how this would look. So yeah, it's just an experiment, like just seeing like what these colors, how this is mixed media, so seeing how it mixes. And just being patient with it. Now I have a ton of characters, and then on top of that, concepts. So like the knights, so I have like a different knights and whatnot, like an order of knights and stuff in the story, and so there's a lot going on. I mean, so you have to just be methodical about it, because it's about designing the look, the feel, the characters. So as far as like the highlights, yeah, you can go in with these darker colors and just see what it looks like. And this is where you kind of just have to be patient with it, because sometimes the colors will kind of shift. But the main thing for me is interest, like interesting, like whatever's interesting is like the main thing. Like just bringing the character to life. The other thing is for the armor, I'm just gonna demonstrate. There's not like obviously one right way to do this because it's experimental. So for example, I've got like a gray marker and a white marker. So I'm gonna just go with just gray to begin with. And part of it is like the lighting. I'm just kind of adding this little highlight like on the edge. So I don't want to throw that off. I want to kind of keep that. So I might just use gray at first and just be methodical about adding highlights. Just making sure it still reads correctly, and just being kind of subtle just for this particular picture. So like that's one way to do that. And then of course you can go in with white for like the final like highlight stuff. So you can see that you can get away with a lot. I mean, you can make this look a different color than like gray. It doesn't have to automatically be gray. But just speaking of that, there's also like the smaller gray. So part of that is just figuring out the armor color. So you can get some subtlety this way. Again, this is just an experiment. And you just kind of want to take your time, and then the color will kind of shift a little bit. It'll probably like fade. But at this point, to me, this is kind of the fun part because you're just experimenting. The other thing is, so yesterday, I had gone in with, I'm going to use I'll use this blue with these light color markers. So I had some other characters and stuff which I'm going to sort of get rid of, at least in this area, and turn it more into like an illustration, which actually it could be. So for example, if I just keep detailing this, one, it would be an okay illustration. It might be a little rough, but it could still look pretty detailed. And then the other thing is I could always scan it in, and like if I were going to do like a print or something like that, like whatever. But the point is that I could touch it up basically, or make it look more refined on the computer. But I mean, I can actually make it pretty refined here up to a certain point. The other thing would be, like I was saying about painting it bigger. I could always do that. If I were going to do that, I wouldn't spend too much time making this detailed. That's kind of a different topic as far as like how to transfer. But my thing is I just focus on this piece and just go from there. So that's one thing. And then also if you go over it, like if you go over the marker here, it'll fade. It'll start to look like that kind of color. And then of course you can keep layering over it. But like you can sort of shift some colors just by cross-hatching. And kind of do this. I want to start a 5-minute timer and kind of wrap this up because this is basically it. I may not even do a ton more than this. Part of it is this idea, because if we're talking about like the final details, it's pretty important to let it sit for a while. I mean, unless there's some reason not to, but I mean, if it's up to me, I'm gonna let it just kind of chill, because a few days later I'm gonna look at it completely different. Because when you are looking at a picture for a long time, your judgment about it is completely different than if like a week later or even a couple of days later. So it's just like little details like this. You're not gonna always know until you give it some time. Or like notice where things are off. That's pretty much it. I mean, part of this is the research, like I was saying about Yeah, so this is like a great sword. I mean, I'm not an expert at, I mean, but it just happens to be the story that that wants to be created. So I learned about these things. I guess these are rondelles. The gorget, I guess. The breastplate, the pauldron. So that's another benefit of art. You can learn stuff. So I mean, I would illustrate this kind of thing like as an illustrator, like freelance illustrator, but I didn't really research it. I just kind of looked at stuff and just to get the work done. So the other thing, like I was saying, is you want to be patient with the way the color dries. This is mixed media, so, and I mean, this is basically final details, so it's just subtlety and not losing the character. So yeah, I'm going to start to wrap this up. I want to thank you for joining me today. I just wanted to kind of show you like that sometimes the sketch can look very different than what you end up with, but that's okay, and that's kind of, sometimes that's how you come up with a design and a character, because it's not just about drawing armor, but it's about designing like a character for a story. And yeah, if you like these videos, please support the channel. I appreciate that, and until next time, keep on sketching.